She walked in alone. What happened next silenced the whole store. It was supposed to be a milestone, one of those quiet, triumphant moments every young woman remembers for the rest of her life. 16-year-old Emma Reynolds stood outside the glass doors of La Belle Boutique, her reflection staring back at her with a mix of excitement, nervous pride, and quiet determination. For the first time ever, she wasn't accompanied by her father, her mother, or anyone else. She was walking into this upscale fashion boutique entirely on her own, ready to choose a dress for a special night. Her heels clicked confidently on the polished marble floor, each step echoing like a drumbeat of independence. Emma wasn't just any teenager. Raised in the heart of Atlanta, Georgia, she had been taught to walk tall, speak clearly, and never let anyone else decide her worth. Her father, Nathan Reynolds, a self-made businessman who had built his retail empire from scratch, had always told her, "Remember who you are, and walk into any room like you belong there." And on that sunny afternoon, that's exactly what she did. The boutique was immaculate, chandeliers glittering above, floor-length mirrors gleaming along the walls, and racks of designer gowns arranged like curated art. Every tag carried a 3-digit price, some with 4. But Emma wasn't intimidated. She had grown up around these things, not because she flaunted wealth, but because her family had earned it. She didn't need to flash credit cards or name-drop her last name. She simply knew what she liked, and she had every right to be there. Her goal was clear: to find a dress worthy of the annual charity gala her father would be hosting in less than 2 weeks. It wasn't just a formal event. It was a symbol of everything her family had overcome and built together. And this year, for the first time, Emma would arrive on her own, not just as someone's daughter, but as a young woman beginning to carve out her own space in the world. She moved through the boutique with purpose, her fingers brushing against satin, chiffon, and lace. She paused by a sapphire blue gown that shimmered under the boutique lighting, its fitted bodice and flowing hem catching her eye. She smiled. "This might be the one," she whispered, already imagining the feel of it swaying as she danced. A nearby sales associate offered a polite nod, and Emma returned it with a friendly smile. She didn't expect fanfare. She didn't need it. All she wanted was to enjoy the simple joy of choosing something beautiful, something that made her feel radiant. This was more than shopping. This was a declaration of independence. A young black girl stepping into a space where she wasn't always expected to belong, and doing so with poise, confidence, and unshakable grace. But beneath the soft lighting and expensive perfumes, the air in the boutique began to shift. Unbeknownst to Emma, someone was watching her, not with admiration, but with suspicion. A woman, well-dressed and well-known in that part of town, had narrowed her eyes the moment Emma walked through the door. In her mind, boutiques like this had unspoken rules about who should walk in and who should walk out. Emma, meanwhile, was simply being herself, a teenager on a mission, a daughter with a dream, a young black woman in America daring to take up space. She didn't know that her quiet moment of joy would soon be interrupted by loud assumptions. She didn't realize that within minutes, her dignity would be questioned and her presence challenged. Not because of what she did, but because of what someone thought they saw. What Emma couldn't have known was that this shopping trip, what should have been a beautiful, ordinary day, was about to become a public test of her identity, her resilience, and the values her father had raised her with. And the entire store was about to watch. She watched her like a hawk, then made a cruel accusation that shook the whole store. At first, it was just a glance, a look that lingered too long. But soon, that glance turned into a glare, and then into something much darker. Evelyn Drake, a well-known regular at La Belle Boutique, had been standing by the handbag section when Emma Reynolds walked in. From the moment Emma's 5'6" silhouette entered the room, radiating quiet confidence and dressed in a simple but stylish outfit, Evelyn's posture stiffened. To her, Emma didn't belong. She didn't need to say it, her eyes screamed it. Evelyn wasn't used to sharing spaces like this with girls like Emma. Not because of anything Emma had done, but because Evelyn had already written a full story in her mind. Young black girl, probably can't afford anything, just browsing for fun. Or worse, planning to steal. That's all it took for her bias to kick in. And once Evelyn made up her mind, truth became irrelevant. As Emma browsed the dress racks, lost in her own excitement and admiration for the fabrics, she was completely unaware of the storm brewing just a few feet away. Evelyn followed her every move like a hawk, pretending to shop, but clearly trailing Emma across the boutique floor. Whenever Emma touched a dress, Evelyn's eyes narrowed. When she picked up a blush pink gown and held it up to the light, Evelyn let out an audible sigh of disapproval, loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear. "She's not here to buy anything," Evelyn whispered under her breath, "probably just casing the place." A few customers glanced at her, but said nothing. The silence was familiar, safe, complicit. Emma, meanwhile, remained in her world. She found a dress she loved, an emerald green satin gown with a soft neckline and a perfectly cut waist, and headed to the fitting room. She smiled as she tried it on, admiring the way it fell just right at her 5'6" frame. She twirled slightly, imagining herself at the gala, confident and proud. This was her moment, until someone decided she didn't deserve it. As Emma stepped out of the fitting room to take a better look in the mirror, Evelyn approached. Her smile was forced. Her voice, sugary sweet on the surface, held a blade beneath. "That's a beautiful dress," she said. "Thank you," Emma replied politely. "I think it's perfect for my dad's charity gala." "Oh?" Evelyn cocked her head. "Are you sure you're in the right store?" Emma blinked. "Excuse me?" "This place isn't exactly budget-friendly," Evelyn added, her fake smile fading. "You might want to try somewhere more affordable." The words hit like a slap, but Emma had heard enough backhanded comments in her life to recognize the code. She took a breath, her voice steady. "I'll let my purchases speak for themselves." But Evelyn wasn't finished. Moments later, she flagged down the store manager. "Excuse me," she snapped. "I've been watching that girl, and I'm pretty sure she slipped something into her bag." Gasps rippled through the boutique. Emma's heart dropped. This wasn't just rudeness anymore. It was a public accusation. The young manager, visibly uncomfortable and unsure how to proceed, approached Emma with hesitation. "Ma'am, I need to check your bag." Emma's cheeks flushed with humiliation, but she didn't raise her voice. She handed over her purse without protest, standing tall despite the heat rising in her chest. The manager checked it thoroughly, and, of course, found nothing. "There's nothing here," she said quietly. "She must have hidden it somewhere else," Evelyn barked. "People like her know how to work the system." Emma's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer injustice of it all. She turned to Evelyn, her voice calm but sharp. "You don't know me. You saw my skin, and you made up a story. That says more about you than it ever will about me." Evelyn's lips tightened. The air in the boutique grew heavy. Customers who once watched in silence now shifted uncomfortably. Realizing this wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was racism, plain and raw. And Emma? She wasn't leaving, not without taking her power back. Because this time, she wasn't alone. Her next move would change everything. The manager looked her in the eyes, then chose silence over justice. The room had gone tense, like the air had thickened with judgment. Emma Reynolds, still reeling from the public accusation, stood upright, her breath controlled but shallow. She had just handed over her purse, willingly, to prove her innocence. The boutique manager, a woman in her late 20s named Megan, carefully opened the bag and inspected it. Dress tags rustling faintly in the silence. After about 30 seconds that felt like an hour, Megan looked up and said softly, "There's nothing here." It should have ended there. That should have been the moment the store apologized. That should have been the moment justice was restored. But it wasn't. Instead, Evelyn Drake, arms folded, chin lifted, scoffed and barked, "Check again." Girls like her know how to hide things. Her voice was sharp, slicing through the boutique like glass against tile. A few customers shifted uncomfortably near the fragrance counter. One woman with a designer tote quietly moved toward the exit. No one said a word. Emma, now standing barely 3 feet from the manager, felt a weight heavier than the $200 gown she had just tried on. It wasn't the accusation itself that hurt the most. It was watching Megan hesitate, watching someone in authority waver, not because of evidence, but because of pressure from someone loud, white, and wealthy. "I already checked the bag, ma'am," Megan said, her voice quiet, almost apologetic. She looked at Evelyn, not Emma. Evelyn didn't back down. "Then I suggest you ask her to leave. This is a respectable boutique. We don't need a scene." Emma's chest tightened, her fists clenched at her sides, nails pressing into her palms. She turned to Megan, her voice low but clear. "You saw the bag was empty. I've done nothing wrong. So why are you still entertaining this?" Megan looked torn, glancing between the two women like a referee at a rigged match. I think it's best if we all just try to de-escalate the situation," she mumbled. "Maybe it would be better if you stepped out for now." Emma blinked. "You're asking me to leave?" she asked, her voice trembling, not with weakness, but righteous disbelief. "After you checked my bag? After you saw I didn't do anything? You're siding with her?" The boutique had fallen into a hush so thick you could hear the air conditioning click on. Evelyn stood smugly by, pleased with the outcome. Megan fidgeted, holding a clipboard like a shield. Her eyes darted down, unable to hold Emma's gaze. "I'm just trying to prevent a scene," Megan said quietly. Emma let out a short, bitter breath. "The only scene here is the one being caused by someone who judged me based on my skin, not my actions. And you had a chance to stop it, but you chose silence." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry, but the steel in her tone silenced even the faint whispers nearby. This wasn't just about a boutique anymore. This was about every classroom where a black student had been sent to the office for attitude. Every boardroom where a woman of color was talked over. Every job interview where her name on the resume got her screened out before the first handshake. And now here she was, being asked to leave a store her father quite literally owned a stake in because someone felt uncomfortable. Emma glanced around the room. No one came to her defense. No one said, "This isn't right." The silence was louder than any insult Evelyn could have thrown. But Emma wasn't about to give them the ending they expected. Instead of storming out, she calmly pulled her phone from her purse and dialed. "Dad," she said, her voice steady despite the fire building in her chest, "I need you to come to La Belle. There's a situation here." As she ended the call, Megan looked up, confused. "Do you need someone to come pick you up?" Emma slid her phone back into her purse and said plainly, "No. I called the man who owns half the stores on this street, including this one." That line didn't just hang in the air, it detonated. For the first time, Evelyn faltered. Her smile twitched. Her certainty cracked. And Megan, the manager who had chosen appeasement over accountability, realized she might have made the worst customer service decision of her career, because justice wasn't just walking through the door. He was on his way. She was humiliated, surrounded, and told to leave. But one phone call changed everything. For a moment, it felt like the whole world had turned against her. Emma Reynolds, just 16 years old, stood in the middle of a boutique she had once admired, now feeling like a criminal on display. She had been falsely accused of stealing. Her bag had been searched in front of strangers, and the manager, who should have stood for fairness, had asked her to leave to prevent a scene. Jai. The irony was crushing. Emma had done nothing wrong. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't disrespected anyone. She had simply walked into a high-end boutique, admired a $900 satin gown, and tried it on with the joy and pride of a girl picking out something special for her father's charity gala. But to Evelyn Drake, the woman dripping in diamonds and entitlement, Emma's presence was a threat. Not because of anything Emma said or did, but simply because of who she was. And when Evelyn demanded action, the store manager listened. Emma stood frozen, her spine straight, her hands clenched so tightly her fingers tingled. The emotional weight crushed down on her. Not just the humiliation, but the knowledge that this story wasn't unique. Black girls across the country had lived it, in malls, boutiques, classrooms, and airports. She had read those stories. Now she was in one. But Emma wasn't raised to shrink under pressure. She was a Reynolds. And Reynolds women didn't back down. Not when they were right. Her heart pounded in her chest like a bass drum. Her cheeks burned, not from guilt, but from the fire of injustice. The customers who had once watched with curiosity now avoided her eyes. The store had gone quiet, as if everyone was waiting to see what she would do next. She took a breath, not a shaky one, but a solid, measured inhale that grounded her like her father had taught her since she was 9 years old. When the world tries to make you small, he'd said, stand taller. And if they don't hear you, make the call. So she did. Emma calmly reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and dialed the one number she knew would change everything. The boutique fell into a low murmur as she raised the phone to her ear. "Dad," she said, her voice even and composed. "I need you to come to La Belle Boutique. There's been a situation." She didn't need to cry. She didn't need to explain. Her tone said it all, and her father would understand. When she hung up, she slipped her phone back into her bag and turned back toward the crowd. Evelyn rolled her eyes dramatically. "Calling your boyfriend to save you?" she said, her voice practically dripping with sarcasm. Emma met her gaze head-on. "No, I called my father. He's the CEO of this boutique chain, including this one." Boom! The impact was immediate. The expression on Evelyn's face shifted from smug superiority to stunned confusion, then disbelief. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her hand, once confidently perched on her hip, now twitched slightly. The customers who had stayed quiet until now whispered among themselves. Even the store manager, Megan, visibly paled. Emma didn't smirk. She didn't boast. She simply stood there, dignified, centered, and unshakable. Because this wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about getting even. This was about demanding to be seen as equal and not asking for it, claiming it. As she stood tall, her 5'6" frame now seeming 10 feet high, Emma knew she had made the right call, not just on her phone, but in choosing to stand her ground. No shouting, no tears, just truth. And that truth was on its way, measured in miles and minutes. Outside the boutique, traffic buzzed on the street. A sleek black SUV was already cutting through lanes, and inside, the energy had shifted. People sensed that something big was about to happen. Emma didn't look at the door. She didn't have to. She just stood tall, not waiting to be rescued, but standing in the strength of knowing who she was, and who was about to walk through that door. The door swung open, and the man who walked in silenced the entire boutique. The soft chime of the boutique door rang like a warning bell. Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even Evelyn Drake, who had been smugly pacing near the counter, suddenly paused. Something had shifted in the room. Nathan Reynolds had arrived. He didn't storm in. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The sheer presence of the man was enough to shift the atmosphere in the 2,000-square-foot boutique. Standing at 6 feet 3 inches, dressed in a tailored charcoal gray suit, and flanked by a discreet but sharply alert bodyguard, Nathan carried an air of quiet power, the kind that comes from earning every ounce of success, not inheriting it. The manager, Megan, visibly startled, rushed forward. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, flustered and breathless. "We didn't expect you today." He didn't answer. His eyes scanned the room in less than 2 seconds. The nervous customers, the whispering staff, and finally, his daughter, standing tall near the fitting rooms, clutching her bag with quiet dignity. His expression didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened just slightly. "Emma," he said, walking toward her, voice calm but firm. "I'm okay," she replied softly, her posture straight, her voice composed. "But we need to talk." Then he turned, slowly, deliberately, toward Evelyn. She straightened, flashing a well-practiced smile. "Oh, Mr. Reynolds, thank goodness you're here. I'm sure we can clear this up quickly. That girl has been—" "That girl," Nathan interrupted, his voice now edged with steel, "is my daughter." The words dropped into the room like thunder. A sharp, collective gasp rippled through the store. Someone near the window dropped their shopping bag. Even the music playing softly in the background seemed to fade. Evelyn blinked, her mouth opening slightly. I didn't know." "She shouldn't have to announce who she is to be treated with respect," Nathan said, his tone unwavering. "No one should." He turned to Megan, who looked like she wanted the ground beneath her to open up and swallow her whole. "You searched her bag," he said flatly. "Yes, sir," Megan said, her voice barely audible. "At the request of a concerned customer. Was anything found?" "No, sir." Nathan's gaze returned to Evelyn, whose face had turned a blotchy shade of red. "So let me get this straight," he continued. "You humiliated my daughter. You accused her of theft. You pressured my staff into treating her like a suspect. And now you're telling me you didn't know who she was, as if that justifies your behavior." Evelyn stammered. "I was just trying to protect the store." "From what?" he shot back. "A 16-year-old girl trying on a dress for her father's charity gala?" The boutique was dead silent now. Every customer was frozen, some nodding, some ashamed, but all riveted. Nathan took one slow step closer. "Let me be crystal clear. This isn't about Emma being my daughter. This is about the fact that you saw a young black girl and immediately assumed the worst. You weaponized your bias and turned it into a spectacle." Evelyn looked around the room for support. There was none. "You are no longer welcome in this store," Nathan said, his voice cold and final. "Or any other store I own." Her mouth fell open. "You can't do that." "I just did." Then he turned to Megan, who stood frozen behind the counter. "And you," he said, not unkindly but firmly, "allowed this to happen. You listened to one loud voice and failed to protect a paying customer, someone who had done nothing wrong." "I'm so sorry, Mr. Reynolds," she whispered. "It won't happen again." "It better not," he replied, his voice low but cutting. "Because I don't run businesses where racism hides behind concern." Then, as the room held its collective breath, he turned back to Emma, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "You handled this with grace," he said. "I'm proud of you." She looked up at him and smiled, her eyes shining, not with tears, but with strength. Because he hadn't come to rescue her. He had come to confirm what she already knew. She didn't need to prove herself. She had already won, and thought she could get away with it, until the CEO banned her for life in front of everyone. The silence after Nathan Reynolds's final words was deafening. Evelyn Drake, once the most vocal, entitled presence in the boutique, now stood frozen, her face pale beneath layers of foundation, her hands clutching her designer purse like it was a shield. She blinked rapidly, her mouth slightly open, searching the room for someone, anyone, to back her up. But no one did. Not a single customer, not a staff member. Not even the manager she had manipulated stood by her now. Because the truth had been laid bare, and no luxury label or air of social class could cover it up. She had been wrong, and everyone saw it. Nathan's words hung in the air like a gavel slamming down. You are no longer welcome in this store, or in any boutique I own." Evelyn swallowed hard. "Mr. Reynolds, please," she said, her voice cracking for the first time. "I didn't mean harm. I was just looking out for your business." He looked her straight in the eye. "By accusing an innocent girl of theft based on nothing but your prejudice?" She had no answer, just a weak shrug and a string of empty justifications. "I didn't know she was your daughter. And she shouldn't have to be," he said sharply. "Respect isn't reserved for the people you recognize. It's required for everyone." His voice was calm, but the weight it carried filled every square foot of the boutique. Evelyn, realizing there was no salvaging the situation, muttered something inaudible, turned toward the exit, and began walking. Her 3-inch heels clicked sharply against the polished floor, each step echoing like a retreat. Just before reaching the door, she turned back, perhaps expecting some final chance at redemption. But all she saw was Emma, standing strong, not smug, not angry, just whole. And that, more than anything, broke Evelyn's illusion of power. The boutique's automatic doors parted with a gentle whoosh, and Evelyn Drake vanished into the afternoon sun, her once commanding presence reduced to a cautionary tale whispered in corners for weeks to come. Inside, there was stillness, then quiet murmurs, a slow, almost reverent shift in the room's energy. Customers who had stayed silent began to nod, some even applauding softly. Not just for Nathan's authority, but for Emma's poise. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't lashed out. She had stood in the fire and refused to shrink. And now she stood, taller than ever. The manager, clearly shaken, approached Emma with a lowered gaze. "I'm truly sorry," she said, "for everything." Emma nodded. "I appreciate that," she replied, her tone gracious but clear. "I just hope next time you trust the facts before the effort." With that, she turned to her father. "Can we go?" she asked. "Absolutely," Nathan said, placing a reassuring hand on her back as they walked toward the exit, this time not as victims, not as outsiders, but as people who had claimed their rightful space. As they stepped out into the golden light of the late afternoon, the sun caught the edge of Emma's curls, and for the first time that day, she smiled without hesitation, not because she had proven herself, but because she had never needed to. This wasn't just a story about a racist incident in a boutique. It was a story about what happens when you refuse to let ignorance define you, when you meet hatred with integrity, when you know your worth, even when others try to question it. Emma Reynolds had entered the store as a teenage girl excited to buy a dress. She left as a symbol of dignity, strength, and self-respect. A reminder that you don't need to raise your voice to be heard when you carry the truth in your presence. And Evelyn Drake? She didn't just lose access to a boutique that day. She lost the illusion that prejudice would protect her. Let this be a reminder to anyone who still judges based on skin, status, or assumption. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the one who speaks the loudest. It's the one who refuses to bow to injustice. She walked out without the dress, but with something far more valuable. Emma didn't leave the boutique with a shopping bag, but she walked out carrying something no money could buy: her pride, her voice, and her power. In just under 3,000 square feet of polished luxury, a teenage girl reminded an entire store, and everyone watching, that dignity is not for sale and justice doesn't come with a price tag. Evelyn lost her access. The manager lost her excuse. But Emma, she gained a story of strength that would echo far beyond those glass doors. Because in a country that still measures people by appearance, Emma measured up by character, and stood taller than anyone in that room ever expected.